Benchmark, the voice of business. Presented by LMD.
On this week's edition of Benchmark, in our first installment, we review the state of the nation as the cricket show sends tourism numbers soaring in March. Then in our feature segment, we turn the spotlight on Janet Ford, head of UK Trade and Investment of the British High Commission, to find out how the trade relations between our two countries can be strengthened even further. And we wrap up this edition by asking Samantha Amarasinghe, economist and LMD columnist, whether our central bank should tighten fiscal policy in the face of rising inflation. That's the lineup for Benchmark this week. To everyone in the workforce, happy Labour Day. Hello and welcome to Benchmark. I'm Savitri Rodrigo. The cricket fever that gripped this fair and mild isle of ours in March was impossible to ignore unless one lived under a rock at the time. And the numbers from the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority confirm that the ICC Cricket World Cup did spell out a win for Sri Lanka, in a manner of speaking. In March, overseas visitor numbers were up by nearly 45% over the previous month, reflecting the passage of cricket fans through the arrivals lounge at BIA. And in the year-on-year tally also, traveller numbers were up by some 34% in the first trimester of 2011 over the matching period last year, marking in excess of 215,000 arrivals. In Sri Lanka Tourism's Visit Sri Lanka Year 2011 calendar, the cricket extravaganza featured prominently, so these stats will be music to the ears of tourism officials. In the count of visitors by region, the trend is still one of Western Europe leading the way as the source region of the highest number of visitors heading in our direction. But when it comes to a country-by-country reckoning, Indians are holding fast to the edge they gained over the United Kingdom in the January to February period this year. Almost 35,000 citizens of neighbouring India headed our way during the first 3 months of 2011, some distance ahead of the nearly 28,000 British visitors that touched down on our shores in the same quarter. All in all, it may well be the case that March will be pegged as one of the most successful months for Sri Lanka tourism this year. Meanwhile, the 2010 annual report of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, which was presented to the President just before the April New Year, notes that Sri Lanka's economy grew by an impressive 8% last year. And this was underpinned by the peaceful domestic environment, improved sector confidence, favourable macroeconomic conditions, and the gradual recovery of the global economy. However, the report concedes that diversification of exports is needed to increase the resilience of the Sri Lankan economy against external shocks. Incidentally, the country's inaugural export bazaar held early last month seems to have been a lacklustre affair. Stallholders weren't impressed by the poor turnout of prospective overseas investors and the public. But the Sri Lanka Export Development Board is on record saying that the target audience attended the event, which was a platform to showcase the diversity of the country's export sector. According to Reuters, Sri Lanka will set a budget deficit target of 5.25% of GDP for next year when the 2012 budget is presented in November. Economists expected the government to revise its targeted budget deficit of 6.75% for 2011 owing to the flood damage that cost the economy some $500 million. But the central bank adds that it's premature at this stage to revisit the 6.75% target set in November last year for the 2011 budget deficit. The Monetary Board of CBSL met on the eve of the Aurudu holidays and decided to increase the statutory reserve ratio applicable to all rupee deposit liabilities of commercial banks by 1 percentage point to 8% with effect from end April. The move was fueled by concerns that excess liquidity in the domestic money market could, if left unchecked, lead inflation to soar. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka notes that broad money growth continued to speed up, recording 17.7% year-on-year in February. And this has been mainly driven by increased credit flows to the private sector. We'll have more on the national economy later on in the show when we ask economist Samantha Amarasinghe whether the time is right to tighten fiscal policy. We now take a break for some messages from our sponsors. When we return, we speak to Janet Ford, Head of Trade and Investment of the British High Commission, about the outlook for UK-Sri Lanka trade going forward. Stay with us.